Good evening, everyone. Looks like we're live on Facebook. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm McKenna. I'm the owner of Murder by the Book here in Houston, Texas. And tonight I am joined by two gentlemen, Smith Henderson and Jon Marc Smith. They're here to talk about their debut novel together, Make Them Cry. If you have any questions for them, make sure to put them in the comments. I'm going to leave in a few minutes and let them chat. I'll come back on later on to go through those questions. But for now, let me go ahead and get them introduced. Smith Henderson is the author of 4th of July Creek and lives in California and Montana. Hi, Smith.
Hi.
Hi. Jon Marc Smith teaches English at Texas State University and lives in San Marcos. Hello.
Hey, McKenna, thanks for having us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And for those of you who need visual aids, this is the book. We obviously have copies in stock and would love for you to order it if it sounds good to you. I'm going to go away and let these gents talk. Y'all have fun.
All right. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, McKenna.
Yeah. So this book is like the quick kind of explanation of it is it's about a DEA agent named Diane Harbaugh, who is she's kind of like at a weird crossroads in her career, and a lot of choices she's made up to this point have like kind of come to a head, and after a moment of kind of shocking violence that happens in the beginning of the book, she realizes the like kind of last chance she has to maybe salvage her career is to do some risky things, and an opportunity presents itself in the form of a Mexican cartel member that she met many years ago, who is now reaching out to her and wants her to come down to Mexico and meet privately. And she thinks this might be an opportunity for her to bring in a big fish and kind of save her career. But what she winds up discovering is a much deeper and more troubling conspiracy than anything just isolated to the cartels, like involving the CIA and other government agencies going back to the war in Afghanistan. The book itself is set in what, 2006, Jon Marc?
2007.
I forget which year. Yeah, 2007. And so it's like in that kind of period of like escalating violence in the cartels in Mexico and the wars in the Middle East and Afghanistan and Iraq. And our hero is kind of pitched into this world of intrigue, and it's kind of inspired by like some of the 1970s like international thrillers and dramas that Jon Marc and I will probably talk a little bit about in a few minutes. But I guess maybe did I miss anything? Because
no, that's good. Way better than I could have done.
Well, thank you.
Although I probably would have remembered the year.
Right. That would. Yeah, you're better at that. And lots of other things. So I guess we should dive in. I thought we'd read a little bit from it and then start to talk about it a little bit and see if you guys, while you're listening, maybe you have some questions that pop up. So the section we're going to pick up with is there's been this, our hero Diane's been in Mexico for a while, and the narrative kind of splits off and starts to follow other characters throughout the book. But one of our favorite and most interesting characters is this guy named Tomas, who's a Sicario who's been after the same the same person that Diane has been meeting with, and he's just caught up with them at the end of the previous chapter, and has the guy he's been kind of chasing after has fired some shots at him in the van that he's been following in. So I'll just pick up from there. Is that, forget anything?
No, that's perfect.
All right. So Tomas plunged out of the cab and onto the ground to take cover behind the Econoline's front end. He didn't even hear the shots. Thought he'd been hit in the ear. He had to move. He dove back inside the cab and reached for the .45 on the seat, but the gun wouldn't come. His hand was slick. He had no grip. He looked at his hand like you would an empty pen. Blood everywhere. the entire right side of him bloody and wet, leaking. He peeked into a pocket of clear glass in the windshield and saw the nephew walking from across the street, squared up, gun flashing as he advanced on the van, 15 meters away and closing. Tomas tried his other hand, the left, but the gun slid onto the floor. He wiped his palm on his lap. He leaned and reached into the console for the other pistol. He put it under his right armpit and was able to hold it there and cock it. He looked at the blood all over and tried to gauge how much he'd lost. He looked around the open driver's side door and then around the front bumper, the small nose of the van not giving him much cover. The nephew was angling, taking a semicircle path to get a shot. The shock had worn off and Tomas could hear the shots now. Pop, pop, pop. He scrambled backward as the headlights exploded, the front tire exhaled, and the van slumped. He took a step sideways and fired in the man's direction just to ward him off, slow him down. The nephew veered, the van between them again. Even now, Tomas thought they might talk. He stepped back to the cab and set the pistol on the driver's seat, picked up the .45, was able to hold on to it this time, stuffed it in his waistband, and then with the other pistol fired 2 wild shots through the windshield at the nephew. His right arm was limp. He had to go. Through the spiderweb windshield, Tomas saw the nephew running sidelong. Thomas threw another wild one around the bumper and then crouched and backwalked along the side of the rear of the vehicle. Liquid bubbled. The radiator hissed. The nephew came around, shaking a plastic bag off a fresh gun and fired as Thomas leapt behind the van. Bullets dimpled the rear door after penetrating the sidewall. Thomas slunk around the rear to the passenger side. The vehicle pinged like some kind of busted saxophone player playing quarter notes, then quiet. The pain focused him for a moment, and he realized his right arm was a mess. He was shot through the tricep, maybe also in the heel of that same hand, but that might be glass. He could only fire one gun at a time. He didn't think he'd bleed to death, but he didn't know it. He felt the other man bump up against the other side of the vehicle, a chance to parley. "Hey," Tomas called out, "let's talk. We don't have to do this." No reply. "You don't know what you're doing," he said. "I'm not here to kill you." He could hear the nephew edge along the side of the van, corner, and lean against the back of it. So close they could hear one another breathing. The only sound on the deserted street. Tomas stepped back, dropped the pistol on the ground so he could open the passenger door with his good left hand, and then removed the .45 from his pants and squared up behind the door. "I'm only here to talk, that's all. I'm alone." No reply. "You fucking shot me, man. Come out. I want to talk." Nothing. And then the nephew swung around the back of the van. Tomas let 4 shots go, the .45 heavy and violent in his palm, all right into the man's chest. The nephew fell, his legs bending beneath him, his shoulder hitting the ground, and then his body flopped up and sprung over, leaving him chest down in the dirt. Blood spread on his shirt, like the man was a bag of wine poked full of holes. Soft steps behind him. He turned and was immediately slapped backward, and he was looking up at the sky and those cottony clouds. That's what he saw. Somehow he was seeing anything at all. How did that happen? Where was he? He tried to move, but all he could manage was lifting his head. The DEA woman stood there, barefoot, maybe 10 meters away with a pistol in both hands aimed at him. She was looking at him and then past him at the dead man, which is when he leveled his gun at her, as best he could. "I just wanted to talk to the crazy fucker." He was speaking Spanish, and he wasn't sure hers was any good. He could feel his focus ebbing, couldn't see her eyes, her intentions. He fired and fired. His head fell back from the effort. He expected to be shot again, but then all he heard were soft steps, receding, receding, and receding.
And then I'll pick it up.
Yeah, go for it.
Sky. He had to close his eyes against it. He'd been out for a minute, less, more, he did not know. the warm pain in his right hip. When he opened his eyes again, he lifted his left leg and twisted himself into some momentum, and then used his good arm to launch himself into a roll to his stomach. He propped himself with his elbow and then the pistol to stand. He'd been shot in the hip, maybe his groin. He just knew he had to move. He couldn't walk really, but he could stand on his good strong leg, and he dragged the bad one, hopping across the empty street to the tavern. When he got to the corner, he turned and held himself against the wall. He breathed, wondering what next. He made for the backside of the building, dragging his foot in the gravel. He crossed to a convenience store. There was a car at one of the gas pumps. He looked inside the store. The people in there scattered when he saw them. He looked in the car, a brown mid-1980s Honda. The keys were in it. He threw the pistol on the passenger seat. He started it awkwardly with his left hand, his right arm screaming. The rumble of the engine like his father's voice on a black eye afternoon. The shock had burned completely off, and his hip was afire, and so was his arm. He put the car in gear and pressed the gas with his left foot and drove across the road and through a wire fence. He set out east across a field. Tomas stopped the car after going through more than a few fields and across 3 paved roads. He searched through the back, but there was nothing except sweatpants and a half bottle of water. In the trunk, a few spare tools, a gigantic monkey wrench, a bunch of plastic bags and bottles of motor oil, a child's backpack graced by a blue genie, Aladdin, he remembered seeing it when he was a child, and PVC pipe fittings and sockets, a jar of plumber's putty, and at the bottom, a smushed and nearly gone roll of duct tape. He could hear sirens, distant, faint. He could hear seagulls. He could use the duct tape. With his teeth and the buck knife, he tore the sweatpants and then fashioned a tourniquet with the waistband elastic. He surprised himself crying out, and sweat popped his skin. His hip had ceased bleeding, it seemed, but he couldn't put much weight on it. The bone was shot to hell. He could feel bits of it. He hacked away at the passenger seat and pulled out pieces of cushion and held them onto his hip and side as he wrapped the last of the tape around his body, cursing and calling out the whole time until he finally stuck a piece of car seat vinyl between his teeth just so he could bite down and not have to listen to himself anymore. What he'd rigged ended up looking like demented padding for a player of some kind of junkyard American football. He drank from the water, left himself a couple of swallows. As soon as he could manage sitting in the driver's seat again, he put the car in gear and crossed his left foot over to the gas pedal again and pushed down on it and drove on. He went through fields and muddy drainages and over a bridge and down easements and back roads, and he'd had much trouble, and he kept finding himself with his eyes closed. Times he found himself coming to. The Honda gave out in a ditch bottomed with old telephone poles. He pushed down on the gas and threw the gear down into low, but there was no going forward anymore. It got dark quickly, or maybe he passed out, or both perhaps. He was able to pull himself out of the car and crawl up the embankment into another field. He made his way along furrows, dragging his left leg, sometimes pulling it forward with his good arm, setting it forward again and again as if he were transporting a heavy pillar in fits and starts. He could see police flashers drive past where he'd left the car. They'd missed it in the ditch. Felt like his last dregs of luck. Bottoms up. He went on hobbling under starlight, globs of blood swinging from his arm like tree moss. At first, he thought the black mouse he found before him and was heading toward was a house or barn. Realizing almost as he came to it that it was a tractor. He sat on the plow, heaving. He could hear ship horns far out in the Gulf. He sat there and imagined the lights of buoys or boats, since he couldn't actually see any from this vantage. It was hard to tell how far away the water was, how far away anything was. With his good hand, he felt at the plow blades, the tractor dark and towering above him. He reached out to start climbing up into the cab. When he made his first step, his foothold went away from him. He was falling and wasn't falling, and the stars were upside down, and he wasn't sure where the tractor went, and then he wasn't able to wonder about that or look for it. and that's it.
Well done.
We better wait a while for all the applause to die down. I mean, I know that it's thunderous and people are probably hooting and hollering. So, we should give them a chance to get
Give 'em a
all
minute,
that
give 'em a minute.
energy out. Don't you think?
Yeah. It was funny, like listening to you read, and I don't know if it had the same experience. This is the first time we've done this. Actually, we haven't read this stuff aloud ever. I mean, I don't know. In our collaboration, I don't think we ever sat down and said, "Okay, hear this." Like, because we'd be in a Google Doc and be like, "Read it,"
I mean, to be honest, I really wasn't listening when you were reading.
Fair enough.
But yes, it's the first time.
Well, anyway, I was listening to you, and no, and it was kind of funny because like we've been talking about this a little bit and going back and forth about it in podcasts occasionally and writing about it and having to think about what you do as part of the promotion of a book. And we've been saying over and over, like, oh, it's there's no, like, we don't know the difference between who wrote what, like, and it's true. Like, when I look at it on the page, we've written these things and the sentences merged together and they're yours and mine, and I don't know who, but listening to it, it was funny because I was like, oh no, I wrote that part. You wrote that. I was smiling at the ones you wrote, like, because like I was like, oh yeah.
Well, I mean,
those are the good ones. No, I was like, well done, like, but it made me remember this thing we don't talk about very often, which is in collaboration that I would often and maybe don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. Recognize things that you'd written that I really loved. We're so unromantic about it. We're so technical. We get into work and we do it. I don't sit there and say, like, I love this phrase, dude, like, it's so good. We don't do that kind of nice stuff that happens in workshop, right? Where you like circle things like star, star, star. This is great. Like, beautiful language. But listening to you read, I was like, oh, I like this. Like, you wrote this. I like this piece, Did you notice that when I was reading, seriously, or did you just not listen?
I mean, it really is like it feels as if like it was created by someone else who's not either one of us, really, to me. Like, it has it's like a document that we somehow found. Like, I don't really it went through so many iterations. Like, maybe it's just like I'm repressing like all the work done on it, or like all the versions, but it just really, it feels as if it's like when I was reading it just now and listening to you too, it's like as if I hadn't ever read it before. Sort of, which is cool. I mean, that's a cool feeling. I don't think I would have that if I just written it by myself. I think it's like part of that where it's like it's so clearly, it's like this thing that we both mess with over time, like hundreds, I mean, thousands of times, right?
Yeah.
So it feels, I don't know, it feels disconnected, which is a cool feeling.
Yeah. It's weird to like have your name on a thing and you're like, I don't, who wrote that? Like, right?
Yeah.
I
mean, I feel sort of like, I'm just going to like name drop and compare us to like a really great author and just be like, I really think that's what Samuel Beckett was going for in his career, like he was really trying to get to that place where he could just pare away all personality and individuality. And like, I don't, we got there, Sam.
Yeah. We did it, Sam. Well, how did this start in your mind?
Well, it's a long time going, right? I mean, this particular, I was thinking about it today. I was like, I said 13 years, but I was thinking about it today. I think it's actually 12 since we actually really started actually writing and not just talking about stuff, of which we did for long.
Just telling round lies.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. We're fixing to do this, over and over. I think we actually started like we came up with the log line with the pitch, basically, I think it was 12 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just like started like sending those screenplay. We started as a screenplay. So we started out doing that, and we sent, I mean, we went through a good, I would say at least 10 iterations of it as a screenplay, like major sort of versions of it.
Well, what's your recollection of the log line of like the screenplay that got where a manager was like, cool, let's hear it, do you remember?
I mean, like some version of, I mean, you know how bad I am at log lines, so this is the bad.
That's why I'm asking you.
You need to, your job is to make it into the good version. So I have the bad version, and then you can make it into the good version. It was like some version. This is terrible. My version is so bad. Some version.
And you're an instructor of screenwriting, so.
Yeah, but I tell all my students, I tell all of them, I'm really bad at this.
Yeah, right. Okay.
I'm really bad at, which is why I can teach it. The log line was something like, man sells insurance to criminals.
Yeah.
That was the premise.
It's like, no, I don't know, maybe I'm a terrible lover of log lines, but I was like, yeah. Well, how's that work? You had this, like, I don't know what was in your mind when you said there's a guy who sells insurance to criminals, but I immediately thought, oh, wow, that's a job that's going to be incredibly interesting and difficult. And we tackled it as a feature, like we're immediately deep in that world. And we have this, and I'll preface this like question with a little story. So we had written we'd written a bunch of screenplays, and we decided that we were going to screw it, we're gonna go write a novel. Like we'd been messing with this idea, and we got frustrated with like our inability or our shortcomings as screenwriters, or lack of connections, or whatever the thing was that we just were like. And I'd published my first novel, and we talked about it, and we said, maybe the shortest way up the mountain to making this thing is for us to write a book. Because
this is 5 years after we started.
Yes, well after we started, like after we'd kind of given up on it even. We're like, and I said, hey dude, like let's write a book together. And this is it. I love this idea. Let's go for it. And what my question is going to lead out of this thing. We started writing the book. We wrote a bunch of it. We went and pitched it. We, as a partial, like we'd written a chunk of it, and we had gotten a sale more or less. So it was like, yeah, let's publish this. And something was bothering me about it, and I remember talking to you about it. I said, I think we started too late in the story. I think we have screwed up. I'm wondering if you think that maybe that was like the problem with the screenplay too. We've been talking about this story for a while, and so I'm talking about a new thing between Jon Marc and I. But basically, like we started over and rewrote the idea from the premise that we started too late in the story. We're going to start at the beginning. And I'm wondering if we didn't start at the beginning of the screenplay either. Like that maybe we had to like go through the process of writing the screenplay wrong, then writing the book wrong to figure out how to tell the story right.
Yes. I think that's right. Although what I would say is if that's a question, it's really something I'd put into the category of more of a comment and not a question, really. So next time you might want to.
Is that right?
This
I guess
is really
the question.
More of a comment and not really a question. But yeah.
Well, we never talked about it like that before. I never thought of it like that. I never thought like, oh, we were wrong all along, even as a screenplay.
Right.
But
basically, we screwed that up too. We're talking about like just years of doing the wrong thing, like just over and over and over failing at all of this for like decades. I mean, we're basically like we're like,
well,
we're like the Dallas Cowboys of failure, since like not, we didn't make the playoffs for like however long, a couple of decades or whatever.
Right.
So it's just like, we were, what we did, I think you're right. We started it late both times. We started it too late both times. That's exactly
like right. You could really be like, and so then my question for you is like, do you think that our collaboration made us overcommit to a bad idea for a long time because there were two of us? Or do you think that like it would have taken twice as long if it was a person by himself or herself to do it, this is a weird like counter reality question, but
I don't know I'm not sure. I think maybe like we were really, really worried. I think to some degree it had to do with the screenplay form and with movies. And we were really worried about we didn't want to tell an origin story. We felt like they were always pretty bad. And we didn't want to do the exposition. We wanted to do the exposition real quickly.
Yeah.
I think we also like felt like we needed this sort of like James Bondish character of Ian Carver,
right.
The guy who actually sells the insurance to criminals. We needed him front and center, Right. So I feel like in the movie, and then as you know, and maybe I can ask you about this. Like, do you have that Carver was the hero of the movie, and then Diane Harbaugh became the hero of the novel. Do you remember when we decided?
I think that was what was
the protagonist.
I think that's what was bothering me is I think we had the wrong protagonist as much as we started the story too late.
Right.
The way we've been talking about it up to this point, hello, inside baseball book promotion shit, it's like, sorry for the S word. We're like, where we're talking about, you kind of like, you're like, oh, how do we talk about this? And you think about talk, what you're going to say. One of the things we've been saying a lot and is like that, well, we started the story too late. That's totally true. I also think, though, that we probably, maybe more importantly, started with the wrong protagonist, because ultimately in this book, Carver's the antagonist, right? You take the two characters that have the most sparks between each other, and you could flip this, you could take any story and, flip it and make the protagonist the antagonist and vice versa. But there is a right antagonist and a right protagonist for most stories. And I would posit that it's the one who has the most interesting problems and things to overcome and journeys, and really are like, the shortcomings of like a James Bond like character is that they're always 2000% committed to catching the bad guy, and they really don't go on a personal journey. It's all external. And once we got into the novel space out of the screenwriting space, we immediately, I think, well, not immediately, because we wrote a chunk of a book that was the wrong book, but we fairly quickly realized that we weren't writing a proper novel. And maybe novels are a great way to realize whose story is the most interesting. Screenplays are sloppy in terms of like doing that excavating work. It's like, okay, that's cool. That character has a motivation. That character has has a thing they really want. Is there something to that? Do you think?
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. It's just everything in screenplays is like you just don't really go deep into the character. You think about their journey and stuff, but you're not deep inside that. You're not thinking about what's really going on inside of them. And I think once we started doing that, it was the form of the novel that forced us after 10 years to figure out that we needed to tell the story from Diane Harbaugh's perspective, and that she was the one who was sort of like, she was in the most danger. She had the most drive. She had the furthest to go in terms of her like spiritual arc. And then it was just obvious. Once we figured it out, it was obvious. I don't know if one of us would have figured it out if we were doing it by ourselves. Of course, we wouldn't have this thing if we were writing it by ourselves. Right. I don't know. I just think it's the way it is. And we like, as you often say, it gets done when it gets done, and we can't do anything about like all the stupid things that we did in the past and all the errors we made. I think it's just that we have to we had to just like, we were like, I mean, okay, so when we had that conversation where you said we've written the wrong book, right? So you call me and we have this conversation and you say we wrote the wrong book. And just so everybody who's listening understands, like, he was literally taking a check out of my pocket and ripping it up into a bunch of little pieces and going down like an LA expressway and throwing those pieces out the window and then saying, we're going to have to try to get that check again sometime. Sometime we're going to try to cash that check again.
Right.
So it was a pretty big, we had to like, I mean, it was kind of scary. It was like, oh my God, like they were going to give us money to write a book. What kind of, like, how does that happen anyway, that people give you money to write a book? Like, it's amazing, right? And then it seemed like it was never going to happen again. And we were just going to, like, it had been so long. At that point, it had been real close to 10 years. And so that was like a difficult conversation. Not that we like fought or argued or anything.
No, you never, by the way, you did not make me feel like, what have you, like, the way you described it, like, you were like, all right, I'm gonna think about it, like, you know, like, okay, look, you know.
Well, you were right. I mean, that's the thing. You were right. And when someone's right about something you're creating, and I mean, that can be like, it can be whatever. It's like if you're, I don't know, if you're building a house or
the paint's the wrong color on the wall.
Right. Or whatever it is, like any kind of creative project, right? That you put it's creation of anything is hard. And so, but you want to do it right. Like, if you care about being, like, having a proper craft, like, even if it's not for like the money, if you care about doing the thing right, like a carpenter is going to put together the house that they're building correctly. You know, like, that's what you want to do. And so it was like, yeah, you're right. We wrote the wrong book. Now we've got to write the right one. And it's just like, we're scrapping all the stuff and we're starting over basically. And it's like, there really wasn't a choice. And what are you going to do? You can't like wallow in self-pity about it, right? Unless, I mean,
yeah.
In that sense, I think working with somebody helps. Like, I think,
right.
if that were you know, working individually on a novel or a house for that matter.
It might break you'd walk off into the woods and be like,
right. You burn your house. You just burn it down and be like, I'm not dealing with that anymore. I'm going to get a new plot of land somewhere.
Right.
And it's too many memories. But it's like you're in it with somebody. So it's like you're like both, you know, to switch metaphors, you're like drowning together. You've got to like save, you got to bail water together.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I think, like, one of the things that I remember us talking about this a lot in screenwriting and going into meetings and stuff, was like about the idea of being a professional. Like, even when we were complete amateurs and didn't know what we didn't even know, like, and the thing is great about writing is everybody can kind of do it. You can read things about how to do it. You can learn craft. You can study it. But the ability to, like, interact on a pro level, to me, like, when we talk about, we had this, sorry to explain, we had this thing where it was like, we're going to this meeting, we're really frustrated with these notes, we have to, like, let them know, like, that we don't like this note on the screenplay, or we'd have to, or even when you and I are interacting, I would, like, think like we're being pros that, like, try and, like, you know, emotionally dress for the job you want to have, not the one that you do have, you know, that you need to show up like, I'm in possession of my emotions and my faculties, even though inside you're roiling, right? And you're trying
the way that you're dressed right now to rob a bank.
Right. Yes. Well, and then
that's the job it's
I'm dressing for the job I want, not the job I have, which is writing this thing. So, like, but what I wanted to ask you, and I don't think we've ever had this, like, I've never posed this question, is like, what are, to you, are like tenets or the ideas of like what makes our relationship or the way you approach like writing a project like a pro mentality, I guess. And I don't mean that in like in a like remunerative way of like, oh, this is, I get paid at a pro level. I mean like being a professional, like on an ethical level, on an artistic level, on a practice level, you know, like what kind of self-care, like, because I feel like people are interested in that, like what sort of things do you do to take care of the professional environment that is basically totally unstructured. No one is coming in and saying like, I'm your manager, so you have to be your own boss.
Right.
So what does it mean to be a pro to you? Because I think we both do a pretty okay job of it without really talking about it. So I'm curious.
I mean, I think for both of us, it involves like waking up and getting to work and like to some degree punching the clock and trying to get in your hours or days every week, you know, even if you have to have, you know, day jobs. And like that, I think is part of it, just as like, where you're just like, I'm putting in the hours, I'm thinking about it the first thing, you know, I'm dealing with the stuff that has to be done, you know, time to make the donuts, basically.
Yeah.
I also think there's a lot in it, what you said, like dressing for the job you want, like I think there's a fair amount of like fake it till you make it or fake it always, sort of, where you're just like, I am doing this and I'm pretending like I know what I'm doing, even if I don't know what I'm doing, you know?
Yeah.
And then last, I would say I tell my students this always. It's like, just don't be an asshole.
Right.
You know, like that's really, when you're working with other people, like to me, that's like sort of the best thing you can possibly do is just not be an asshole. I mean, you're going to be at some point, you're going to be difficult. Like everybody is going to be difficult, you know, but like you try to just not be, you know, mean or babyish or infantile or dense or whatever, you know, you just like try to not do that. And I think that goes a long way.
It's interesting. You're talking about like kind of balancing this like thing between being pretending like something you aren't, and at the same time like not being the thing that you're pretending you are, right? Like, you know, like or being the best version of the thing you're pretending you are, I guess. Like it's like, oh, I'm pretty killer at this, like you're faking it. Anybody buying this? And it's like, cool, they're buying it. Don't also be like the worst version of that, you know? And and be grateful. Like, and I would argue that that's like a extension of something that I've been really interested in with us, is like that our working relationship is made like deepen our friendship for sure. But also like, and if there's one thing maybe that like you could argue for like why people should just collaborate, it's that you might find yourself having stronger muscles in the friendship department in general. That like you like if you are working on a project with someone, and I've talked about this, I've mentioned this before in our other conversations about like this Aristotelian idea of friendship, where like really the deepest friendships are like based on, you know, all sorts of commonalities, but fundamentally it's not really a friendship until you at least have a thing you do with your friend, a common, almost to like a meaningful goal. It can't just be like, oh, we play racquetball, although if we play racquetball to be awesome at racquetball, that could be fine, but like that, you know, you have like something a little bit outside of yourself that's like meaningful to do, and how that like informs like, but what's funny is like I feel like you spend a lot of time as a teacher and mentor, and I was wondering if like any part of our working relationship has filtered into your practice as an educator or as a mentor in general, because I'm actually kind of interested in that as I get older. Like what, like you like I'm a parent, and it's like being a more meaningful person is like, you know, kind of like, you know, like a deepened like existence. And I feel like we don't talk about this a lot. We just talk about the work we're doing, but I'm curious how what we're doing informs like your practice as a teacher.
I think maybe like, so along with Aristotle, I would say that what you're saying about Aristotle and friendship makes me think of Simone De Beauvoir. And by the way, we never throw away. We're only throwing these names out because we are being watched by people. Like we would be like, I mean, it would just be like, you know, I don't know, like wrestlers and like Merle Haggard and James Brown or something. I don't know. That's what we talk about most of the time. So anyway, Simone de Beauvoir. She says like that you do like free projects of the self, right? Like that's the way that like in this like world that doesn't have meaning, you know, that like you can't expect God to save you, that you have to sort of create your own values, but you do that by doing like free projects of the self. And I think that basically like through working with you, I've come to like think about that, like realize the importance of that in most people's lives. Like I would never really talk, it wouldn't be something I would ever talk about really, or I would ever like probably even think about. But I realized that like students need those kind of things. And I mean, it's romantic, but I think it's also like really important to people, the like the notion of creating something. And so I think that like that sense of like creating, whether it's you or whether you're creating it with others, like you're creating a thing. And then that thing, like it may go out into the world and be unsuccessful. It may be successful, whatever. You can't do anything about that. Like nobody may care. People may care. Who knows? But it's like you create it and you've made it, or you've made it with somebody else. And like that is the way to achieve meaning in a world that is like very, very depressing and very difficult to get through and extremely dark for lots and lots and lots of people. And I just think like, you know, I just try to, I don't spend a whole lot of time talking about that, but I do value it more than I used to probably, where I, you know, talk to students about how the things they do, even if they're not going to go write stories for a living, or they're not going to go write screenplays for a living, or study British literature for a living, or whatever, that whatever they do, if they do it, they do it as a means of like making something that is valuable. I guess we've got McKenna coming. We probably.
No, you're good. You certainly keep talking. There's never any non-awkward way to pop back on the screen when they were talking. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean,
good to see you. We're like, well, hi.
I guess the one thing we didn't talk about was drugs, like not as in like the prescriptions that we're taking or not taking or whatever, but the way that, and we can spend a couple minutes on that, right? The way that the way the drug war informed the book. Do you have any thoughts about that, Smith?
Well, I mean, we talked about this when we first talked about this idea. It was like good like premise, you know, kind of what a weird job that would be, like someone who helps like insures criminals. And we were talking about like why would that job exist? Like who would do that? And one of the things we zeroed in on was the fact that the drug war is incredibly has so much splash over violence that there might actually be a justifiable reason for providing some other mechanism other than law enforcement or lawyer. Like, because you can't, if you're a cartel, you can't call the cops if you have a problem. You have to solve it yourself, and you usually solve it with like extreme violence. You know, you have to have a standing army. Basically, you can't call a lawyer to, like, you know. So innocent people get killed all the time, and it was like, oh, and that's what the thing we zeroed in on that I thought was really interesting was like, what if there was a way, as absurd as it sounds, to like bring a controlling mechanism, a sort of mitigating mechanism into the black markets.
Right.
And that became like, and then we went down a whole rabbit hole of like what that looks like and what kind of person that would be that would do it. And we built a whole, and then we started looking at like Afghanistan, and the fact that like probably, I mean, there were like that that the war in Afghanistan, we clearly chose sides with like poppy warlords and drug cartels in Afghanistan over the Taliban, and like in order to take on the Taliban. And suddenly this thing that seemed absurd had laddered up into a Baroque reality that was kind of true. And
Right.
I wondered if like you had a moment like that when we were working on it, like where you were like, oh, this is not that made up. Like the world kind of functions like this in some weird way.
Well, once I realized that what we call drug cartels are not really drug cartels, they're more like drug gangs. A true cartel is more like the one that Pablo Escobar ran in Colombia, where it was like a bunch of different gangs all pitched in order to ship cocaine to the United States, and then they shared the profits and the losses. So that is basically insurance. And like once I realized that, I was like, oh, well, they've been doing it. It sort of changed a while because cartelization actually, you know, as you know, the cartels that we have are more like sort of baby bells. You know, they're like they you know, there are a bunch of different groups that don't necessarily do that anymore. So cartel is basically a misnomer. But I would also say that one of the things that also happened with us is like even more important to, at least to me, and I think, and definitely to you, more important than that is like when we realized that this was like the perfect spiritual problem for our characters too, that the drug war and all the terrible things it's wrought, you know, of which like I think that many of the things that the nation is struggling with right now, like the police state, overcrowding in prisons, all the
carceral geography and the militarization of the police and all of it,
all of it. I mean, you can trace right, you can trace a fair amount of it to terrorism, but it starts with the drug war, and the drug war is still, I would argue, the prime moving force. I mean, that's why, for instance, the cops kicked down Breonna Taylor's door.
Yeah,
it's because of drugs, and so it's like this is something that affects, like, I would argue every single person that lives in the United States is culpable in some way, and it affects most of us in our daily lives in some way, like even if it's just like the prisons in our communities or whatever. So once we realized that, like, once we started thinking about the way that the drug war deforms people and the way that it's like done all these things, like the way that it's like affected our the people that are fighting it, whatever side they're on, and then everyday people, then it was like not only did we realize that we had an idea that that worked, that was plausible, but it was also like what I would just consider to be like a perfect thing for characters to struggle with, and also something that's basically unsolvable,
right? Because both sides don't want it to end. You don't want the cut your police budgets and your interdiction budgets and your, you know, and you definitely don't want it to be legal if you're a cartel, because that will drive the prices down. So both sides in the war are in favor of the war,
right? Which, I mean, I guess like maybe that's the it's strange. It's a very strange phenomenon, and it's like that. I think the fact that there's so many fingers in the pie, it's like how that's what makes it seem like how could it ever be solved. And so, you know, our book has this guy who has this really, it's both a ridiculous idea and an idea that is in its way sort of plausible, in that he thinks he can help make the drug war not as costly in terms of lives.
All right, so a little bit of housekeeping before we get to the questions. If you tuned in late on this, just hang out for a little bit. As soon as this video is over, you'll be able to watch it from the beginning on Facebook Live. Also give me about 2 days and I'll get it on YouTube, so you could share it with people who aren't on Facebook. We do have a few questions. So we have a question from Jonathan, and I'm just gonna leave it up to you guys to whomever answers the question, pick amongst yourselves. So Jonathan wanted to know, why did you decide to have a female protagonist?
Well, she made herself be the protagonist, basically. She basically slapped us and was like, I'm the protagonist of this book. We spent 10 years with a dude as the protagonist, and then we finally made the right decision.
Yeah.
It's funny, I ask authors a lot if the characters ever take the wheel, like they're writing and they know the character, and then all of a sudden the character says, no, I'm not going to do what you planned for me to do. So it sounds like she just took over and said, nope, I'm the lead.
Yeah. I mean, we when we were early versions of this, I found myself, and part of my anxiety about like, I think we wrote the wrong book, was I found her telling writing backstory scenes that I thought were already done, and I was like, she's insisting that this be in the book is a backstory thing. Like, I need to explain why this is happening, and she just what it really was too was that she was the way for us to enter into the world of the book. She was the one who was courageously trying to discover the stuff that most of us wouldn't want to discover. Like, most of us would turn back and be like, this is too much of a hassle. She does all the things. Like, there's a constant thing throughout the book where she says, I'm the one who does the things. She does the things, and so that character you're the one who follow, right? They do the things, they create all the trouble, they create all the solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. When you were talking earlier and you actually did the reading, and it was interesting to watch how you talked about hearing the reading out loud. We had a couple interesting questions. So Martin was wondering if you could discuss the writing process a little bit more. And then kind of related to that, Trace was wondering if you did any reading aloud when you were in the writing process, and if having had this moment this evening, you think that would have been beneficial.
I'll say, I'll take the second question first, and you can take the first question second, Jon Marc.
Nope, that works.
All right. Well, I was gonna say, I when I sat down, this is a true, honest, vulnerable moment I'm gonna share. When you go and read your own stuff out loud, you hear things that ring false, that sound screwed up. You will never stop editing. You never, at least I don't. I never stop hearing things that I wish I had done a little bit differently. And so you sit down and you have to calibrate the way you're going to read it. And yeah, it's we did not sit down and read the whole book aloud or anything like that, because it's a completely different experience. I find myself as a reader reading other people's books and thinking they sound really great, and then reading them out loud and they don't sound as great. It's weird. It's like a different thing. It's like watching you ever watch your favorite TV show and you read the dialogue on in subtitles, and you're like, who wrote this crap? It doesn't read right, but when you hear an actor read it, so they're different things. That said, I think there's a utility in trying out dialogue or trying out the poetry of your prose, and it just really depends on what you're doing. This book was a pulpy book. Everything on the page needed to be short with sentences that punched and felt and that's a different thing than when you read it out loud. And I noticed that tonight. I was like, oh, I need to smooth out some of those bumps. So yeah, it's weird. They're not the same thing. You'd think they would be, but they're not. They're different. What you read is different than what you hear read to you. Right? That sounds about right.
Yeah. Oh yeah. What was the first question?
The first one was just more about the writing process. How did you actually collaborate with the writing?
Yeah. So what we did was, and this has basically been more or less the same throughout the time we've been doing this. So for many years, for something like 15 years, where what we do is we first beat out the whole story. So we go through and outline it in you know, as much detail as sort of we can stand, where we're just like talking out every single element of the story, bringing up all the you know, all the things that don't work, like figuring out how to make things work, thinking about whether something is plausible or not, et cetera, et cetera. And that takes a long time, and we just do that by talking. We don't actually look at each other. Like this is like the first time I've seen him in 10 years, really. It's not, but we never ever chat looking at each other. We only chat like with the audio. So we do that, and that takes a long time, and we have to keep you actually have to keep coming back to that over and over. And then usually the rest of it is more or less catch as catch can, where it's like we don't really, I mean, there maybe occasionally we assign chapters if somebody feels like they really have a beat on it. But usually what we do, or really always what we do, even if we assign chapters, is that someone takes a pass at it, and then that's like the breach in the dam. And after that, we're just sort of like writing it together in Google Docs. But generally, someone takes a pass at a chapter, and that pass can sometimes be like basically none of it is left by the end, you know. Yeah. But it really is important to get like those first to you know, like really get those first cracks in the dam going. And then we just sort of go back and forth and just like add to it and take away from it and add to it and take away from it over a long period of time until we're done.
Is your writing schedule like you both get up at the same time and you're both on Google Docs, or like you write in the morning and then you say, hey, I took a look at this, and then he'll catch it when he can't?
Yeah, it's more like the second. Like you know, if anybody's interested in collaborating with somebody else, I think like there are ways to you know, manipulate your partner into doing the parts you don't want to do. So I would get him to like take a pass at the first stop. I'd be like, yeah, no, I think you got the, I think it sounds good, man. Like, sounds like you got it really nailed down. And then he would send me something, and I would be like, you know, like we're gonna have to rewrite this, dude. And then I would do the same, you know, then I would send him something, and he would be like, this whole chunk, I don't understand it, you know, like this conversation, what the hell is going on, you know? And I'd be like, I just winged it, you know, like take another pass at it. And so the like, you know, yeah, we would really tear apart each other's work with so much love. It was like tearing apart like meat for a stew, you know. So we're gonna eat it later. It's not like it's this terrible thing. We're gonna throw it away. We're gonna it's gonna be good. But yeah.
That feeds right into this next question, which is from Beth. She asked if you've ever had a period in your writing process where you disagreed so much that you were afraid that it would affect your friendship.
We've never even actually hung up. We've never hung up on each other. Like we've never been like, I really don't think we have. Like, so we've never gotten to the point where we even really had like a yelling match where we hung up.
That does like sort of acknowledge that like you could have, like that we could have been so annoyed with each other that we did, you know.
I definitely could have.
I mean, you know, it's a little bit of a like a thing of like we, you know, you might hurt somebody's feelings if you say the wrong thing at the wrong time. But I think we have like a no wrong time zone around us where like I just know that if one of us is being obtuse and difficult or whatever, that it's just a day in the long series of days that we're, you know, going to be working on this thing together. Maybe we got married when we started to write a book together, in the sense of like, we're just like, you can't throw a tantrum on Tuesday and then it's over. You have to throw a tantrum every day for a month before we're done. So like it just, you know, it's not allowed really.
Right. Right. And I really think the key is like, you just keep talking. I mean, you keep talking. Sometimes you're just like, we can't figure this out. We'll deal with it later. But I do think like you keep talking and you'll be able to figure it out.
I have a great thing to say about collaborating with people is you make common cause with your partner by saying that's a problem for future us. And it's like, screw those guys. Like, they'll have to do with it. Like, they will fight later over what we did to them, and they'll be so mad at us. Not our problem, and we can continue on with our So you can kick the can. It's kicking the can.
Right. Yeah. It's like climate change. It's like it's like, yeah, whatever. We'll have to deal with it someday. It won't be us now.
Yeah.
That's our policy. I don't know it's a great policy, but
it's really not good for public policy. It works artistically.
Yes.
I would say that.
All right. We have 2 more questions and then we'll wrap up. So
can't believe there's more.
There are more questions. Was this a story that you wanted to tell from the heart, or did you see it as a commercial project where you wanted to do a professional job, but it was primarily a money-making thriller?
Oh man, that's a good question. I think that it's you're asking kind of a good career question, which is like, how do you balance the professional, the like commercial aspects, like how do I get to keep doing this job, with like the spiritual requirements that come to bear on doing any artistic work, because you can't write something without caring about it on a deep level. I can't. I need to care. So to answer your question, I think it's like, you can identify something that's commercially viable, and by commercial, in my mind, I just think it means like other people might share that enthusiasm. You have in your mind a sense that this isn't just something you care about, or this isn't just something that you alone will do. My first novel was about a child protective services worker in northwestern Montana who's dealing with some crazy guy who might immediately shoot law enforcement the first time they see them. And I don't know why I wanted to write it, except it was a synthesis of a bunch of stuff in my life, and it was my artistic. It was to me it didn't matter whether people liked it or not. I could just say like I did my best in terms of expressing my enthusiasms, and I hope other people like it. This was a different exercise in the sense of like, oh, I feel like this is something people will be interested in reading because I like this kind of genre. I like this kind of story. I'm interested in these problems. How can I make it entertaining? And also, can I put a little bit of all of my spirit into it? So both had a bunch of my own personal investment, emotional, spiritual investment in them, but they came from different directions, I guess. Like one was like, I don't care. And it was like, oh, cool, people got it. So that's one way of solving that problem, right? Is just following your absolute passion and doing it to the hilt, and just being fine with that and hoping that people will join you. I think the other way is to like find a thing that you think, oh, people might come along with, and engaging with it on a deep emotional level as much as you can with that material. But in both cases, I do totally believe you have to like find the thing that really means something to you, that feels risky. The other thing I'll say, and I'll shut up, but like, I believe in writing the thing you're scared to write. And in both cases, I was scared to write the book that was personal, and I was scared to write the book that was like a collaboration with my good friend and that might not work commercially or be a risk or fail in some way. So they're both like, I feel like if you're trying for some kind of courage, you're like trying to be courageous to yourself, not to anybody else, just courageous to yourself, like you're kind of doing the right thing. I had a lot to say about that question. I loved it. I don't know, Jon Marc, do you have anything to add about that?
No, I have nothing to say. I mean, you said it all, so I'm good.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with all that.
I always tell people that my favorite bit of advice from authors to new writers for years is that write a book that means something to you, because you never have any guarantees of getting published. But at the end of the day, if you've written something that you're proud of and that meant something to you, you still have something to be proud of. But it's not based purely on the commercial success. So I think you're right about, you have to have an emotional investment in whatever you're doing. And if you think that, you know, this subgenre or whatever is more commercial right now, still find your way into it. So yeah, sounds good. All right, we have a very specific plot question, and I have to admit I'm concerned that this is going to lead to a spoiler, so no spoilers. But Steve asks, how long before Bronwyn stopped texting Diane, and will he show up in future stories?
He's still texting her.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah.
Maybe he's like switched to emojis now or GIFs.
Right.
Maybe. But I think he's still texting her.
It's really funny. Yeah. All right. So on that note, we're going to wrap up for tonight. Like I said, you can find this video from the beginning on here on Facebook, or it'll be on YouTube shortly. We do have copies, obviously, of Make Them Cry. So we would love if you'd consider ordering a copy. Thanks so much to the two of you for your time tonight. And thanks to those of you who are watching. Tomorrow night, we will be back with Craig Johnson talking about the new Longmire book, but we will actually be on YouTube. So not here, YouTube Live, last minute change. And we just announced events with Lee Child, Michael Connelly, John Grisham, and Brandon Sanderson. We announced them all yesterday. So those are coming up soon. Thank you all. Thank you, gentlemen. Have a great night.
Hey, thanks for having us. It was terrific. We really appreciate it. Y'all buy the book from Murder by the Book.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Bye.